In this video, we're going to focus on sculpting a monk adventurer character. If you have any questions about the setup or add-ons I'm using here, check out the description for more information on these. Let's get to it. So starting off with the armature poser again, clicking on each of the objects and hitting the R key. And once you've hit the R key in object mode, you can hit the X, Y or Z key and it will snap to that axis while rotating. Using a cylinder and scaling along the Z axis to create the staff. If you want to sculpt along with this, you can download the armature poser file from my Gumroad. Getting the basics of the facial features in there, the eye sockets and the jaw defined. Making sure those shoulders are in position. You've got slight wiggle room on where they can be positioned relative to the chest. Adding in the sandal now. Starting with a sphere to create the clothes, just using the standard brush with quite a high strength to just mark out the initial flow of the clothes. You can use pinch as well to sharpen up some of the folds. Find it quite handy when creating muscles to control shift drag portion of the sort of arm, and then use the mesh filter inflate to inflate, say it was a calf or something, so you'd mask out the ankle and then you can inflate the calf, and if you feathered the mask then it creates that gesture quite well. In object mode, the measure tool is quite useful to find out exactly how tall it's going to be when it prints out. It's currently standing on a 40mm base. If you download the armature from my Gumroad, there's 3 different size bases that come with it as well. Adding in a waistcloth and some extra clothing now. The snake hook tool is really useful for bending and twisting the clothes to give them a better flow. Creating an idea for a symbol here, just link to duplicate the item and then the object and then mirrored across the x-axis to try and create an interesting pattern. I find using the pinch tool from a distance is really handy to sort of bunch up the geometry in quite a global way. If you keep an eye on the top left, you'll see what brushes I'm using at each time. It's creating some pointy ears now. I'm not sure what race this character is, but that's why I've gone with the name of Monk Adventurer, because I knew that I wanted it to be a monk. Worth pointing out that I'm using PureRef. I'm using a program called PureRef to handle the reference images I've got. I just find some different images of monks on Pinterest and then just put them into sort of a mood board, and I can kind of from there just create a character from the variety of other ones that I see in front of me. There's lots of common traits that a monk has to give you the feel of how he should look. So blocking out some leg armor now, keeping the resolution really low at first with all the objects, and then you can use the standard brush usually to just with a high strength to mark out the main forms. So as you increase the resolution, you can just start to tighten up the shapes, but it's important to think big at first. I'm just trying to develop this symbol, and so I'd like to make it look quite interesting and iconic. I have a square behind the symbol so that I can push the geometry back through that, also pull it out in front of it to help create this symbol. Just putting it in position on the chest just to see how that looks. I was thinking of repeating it in various places. I'm adding it to the staff now. Using the mirror modifier, we can make it repeat in various different places on the model. If we use the pivot point of the mirror to the staff, then when we mirror it across the Z, it will go onto each end. Increase the resolution on the clothes now, using a standard brush just to define some folds. We don't need too many because this will be about a 40mm miniature. If you go too detailed, then it really won't be that visible once it's printed. Just checking out some of those proportions. Up the resolution on the face and just going in and adding some extra character. Mainly the standard brush, but draw sharp's quite helpful as well. Using a sphere for the eyes and then the mirror modifier across the X. We're trying out that symbol on the forehead now, just to see how that looks. I don't think I've mentioned the grab brush yet. I'm using that constantly, so that's very, very important brush to get the hang of. I think I use that so often I don't even remember to mention it. So I do have a video about sculpting hands faster. In the past I have been using base mesh to create all the hands I've been making, but as I've got a little bit better at understanding the form of a hand, I thought I'd have a go at just making it from one mesh this time, just to see how it goes. Focusing mainly on the index and middle finger shapes in the fist, and the thumb as well. changing the flow of the waistcloth just to make it match the other clothing in the direction it's going. It's important to try and work out how your character is moving, and then you can make all the other objects match this flow, and it gives it a better gesture overall. So we just got a box for his little satchel at the moment. Just a couple of cylinders pinched in the middle. They're supposed to be scrolls, so just like rolled up. I would say it's quite good to get all of the shapes you intend to have on the character, just as a low resolution, very simple shapes, so you can get a feel for the overall composition, so you can see quite quickly if there's something missing, perhaps it's too busy in one area, and you can adjust very quickly without spending too much time on something and then it's not needed. I think overall this sculpt took about 8 hours to complete. And I would say that a lot of the time tends to be in the later stages, so right now when you're just blocking all the shapes in, it doesn't take very long to get the sort of primary forms in place, but it's just all the extra detail after that takes the time. So using the inflate brush every now and then when working with muscles, it's a really nice tool for sort of fattening up muscles and things like that. And if you draw sharp in this sort of in between of muscles and then inflate, it has a nice sort of pinching effect. Coming back to the face to add a bit more character, mainly using the standard brush. If you parent objects together, that can be quite handy when you need to move a whole leg, for example. You can just move the thigh and then the rest of the objects will move at the same time. You need to adjust the pose at some point. Just defining that thumb a little better and the index and middle finger, as I find the other two fingers not so important if you can let those fade away as secondary shapes. Trying out that symbol as a belt buckle now. Improve the gesture of these clothes and increase the resolution again. Folding of clothing is a very tricky topic for me at the moment, so one of the reasons I'm working on a character like this is to try and improve my ability to place those folds. It's tricky to make folds look like they should be there and look natural and things like that. As I say, just focusing on 3 or 4 big folds on each item of clothing, and then once it prints out, it should be enjoyable to paint and be well defined once printed. Increasing the gesture of the shoulder through the clothes. Sometimes when you've laid over clothes like that, you can lose the anatomy. You've got to ensure that is pointed out. Defining this leg armor further, so it's one of the few hard surface objects on this character. I do have a video centered around hard surface sculpting, and I'm using one of the brushes that I mentioned in that video here. So if you're interested to know how the H polish brush I've got is set up, then check that video out as well. I've duplicated the bag and mass slice and fill the holes to separate off some of the different parts of the bag, and then I can up the resolution and define those better, the way they connect together and meet, to refine those shapes. Just checking out the model from a distance and just trying to find how the overall composition looks. It's good to keep an eye on that, and you can see if you feel something's missing or something doesn't look quite right, because it will be reasonably small once it's printed, so the main gesture is important. So I've merged together the foot, calf and thigh, and I don't usually do this until right at the end, but I find that the seams, sort of the ankles and the connection points, don't tend to look very good if I leave them too late. So I've decided to get it done quite early now, and then I can improve the sort of volume of the ankles and things, because I don't tend to do those as well. Making sure to keep a backup of any separated objects, just in case once I merge them together, maybe I'll lose some of the anatomy or I'll lose my way, then I can always revert back to the way it was. Just improving the connection between the foot and the sandal so they don't merge together when it's printed. Using that H polish brush just to flatten out the knee. I find the standard brush is really useful for most things. You just you can add and remove to the forms very freely.
So I'm doing the same with the left arm, just merging it all together, remeshing it reasonably high, and then I can work on the wrist and the elbow, using smooth as I go, as we transition from that much lower resolution, so the surface is pretty uneven. Something I'm trying to consider is the bicep on this bent arm will be bulging out slightly more than the other one, which is straight out. So little things like that will help add a little bit of realism to what you're doing. Adjusting this fist further. Since I've done it this way as well, I'm not really sure which way I prefer. It does feel better to create the hand from scratch, and it perhaps gives it more of a unique look than using the base mesh, but easier to make it 3D printable as well, because it's already one watertight mesh. Whereas if you're using all these individual objects, you've got to make sure that they're overlapping within the hand, so it can be a little bit fiddly. Separated out the thumb using mask slice and fill holes, so we can define the connection between the thumb and the fingers better. There's a couple of books that I use which I find really handy while I'm working on anatomy like that. I have the Bridgman's Guide to Anatomy, and I also have a smaller book called Morpho, quite useful for quickly looking at reminding yourself how these forms look. So using the standard brush to create the folds for the pants, made a duplicate of that leg and just mask slice and filled holes on a section of it to create the pants quickly. With the leg armour there, just making sure that the way it connects to that thigh is 3D printer friendly and that it merges well. So using the outside of the shape of the leg armour, I was thinking this might look better as the symbol. So we have that repeating pattern, but it's a variation in that, and it's just the edge of it. So you'll create a bit of harmony there with the shapes. making the wrist quite boxy. It's much more like a square than the forearm is. Trying to use separate objects for the eyelids. I find that you can either really increase the resolution of the face and then you can define the eyelids nicely, but I feel like it's difficult to keep on top of the rest of the face then because it's such a high density. So if you have them as separate objects, you can make them very detailed and keep the face at a lower resolution and more control. You can always merge them later as well. Masking out the bicep allows us to have more control over editing the forearm, really digging in with draw sharp there, and we can always use inflate to tighten up those marks. Just trying out an idea for some of the cloth reaching out towards that side. It just seems a little bit empty in that area, so I just want to see how this would work out. Using that H-polish brush to flatten out the sides. Adding in some files, some little accessories to go with his bag. And a cork to go on top. Turning off the X and Y symmetry, but leaving on the Z one, start to define this scroll a little better. Making a duplicate of the merged arm, and then we can use a mask and set the pivot to under the cursor. Allows us to bend at the elbow. Having the thumb separate allows us to just rotate it slightly outwards because the hand is going to be a little bit more open because it's holding the staff. Then adjusting the anatomy on the outstretched arm. refining that rope a little bit, but I'm actually going to switch that out for a rope created using modifiers later on. Creating a duplicate of the top eyelid so I can create the eyebrows from that. Selecting all the different objects in the bag and then hitting the / sends you into the focus mode, and you can just look at those objects in particular while you're sculpting. Something I always forget to mention is that I'm using the D key to switch around in sculpt mode with the different objects quickly.
I recently got a 16x10 monitor to sculpt on. The Wacom Intuos Pro graphics tablet I use to sculpt is actually 16x10 in ratio, so I got a monitor to match this, and I'm able to use more of the tablet. Unfortunately, when I'm recording now, I do have to crop off part of the video, so I've chosen to crop off the bottom because there's nothing that you'll miss there.
I would say draw sharp, standard, inflate brushes, grab are all great for working with clothing. Making a duplicate of that left leg so we can bend it like we did with the right arm. I'm smoothing out the mask at the opposite side to where the knee is, so the bend will go a little bit smoother. You're always going to have a few artifacts when you bend a mesh like this, so you just need to clean it up once you have it in the correct pose. Trying out a new symbol on the leg armor, making the second leg armor piece a unique object so that I can vary it slightly. So sometimes you'll find if you remesh an object like this leg, then it can be a little bit too dense to make the changes as cleanly as you'd like. So you might need to step back and use a larger resolution. So then you can step forwards to more detail later on. So I'm replacing the second symbol for this one now, and I believe this is the one that I end up with in the end. Using pinch and draw sharp and a H polish brush to just define those eyebrows. parenting up all the objects here so I'm able to move it all together. Just curling the toes upwards slightly. I find this is a really nice gesture for the feet. It gives them a really nice shape. I think if you look at a variety of different shoes and different footwear, you can see this sort of the toes curling upwards in the shape. So I think it just makes the foot look more natural. I've smoothed out those cheekbones a lot, and just try and draw sharp to just create lines where they should be to see what sort of effect that gives off. I'm creating a curve here, and I'm using the array modifier to try out a necklace. See, a lot of the monks in the artwork I've been looking at, they tend to have this type of necklace, and just see how it looks. Switching out the symbol on the staff, and now I'm confident that I'm going to keep this one. I bend it around the staff so it's in a better position, or more final position, and then start to add a bit more definition to the staff and create some interesting shapes and make it look good. So now doing a final remesh on the hand, arm and thumb, merging it all together and then creating some final definition to these parts. So using that draw sharp and then inflating afterwards really tightens up the lines you've drawn. It's worth factoring in as well while you're sculpting how much a certain object will be visible from a particular angle. So the inside of the fist here, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it's not going to be as visible as the other parts. So you just create a decent gesture there, then it will look good enough. Just trying out stabilized stroke on the draw sharp. Sometimes I find it's quite handy. It just smooths out the stroke and then you don't have to be as accurate when you sort of freehanding these lines. Taking the face to its final resolution, smoothing it out generally, and then I'm going to go in and define those features. Using that stabilized stroke again, keep the lines nice and smooth. Just going over all of the forms that have softened due to the smoothing when the resolution went up. It also gives you, because of the higher resolution, it gives you the opportunity to really get stuck into some much finer details, as you know that whatever you choose the final resolution to be, you know that it's not going to change from here, so you can get as detailed as you think will become visible on the print. So we're aiming for this to be about 40mm high, so a lot of the face details should appear. Put it this way, it's much more detailed than I would be doing if it was 32mm. Cleaning up that symbol with the draw sharp and then going in with that H polish brush, really clean up the edges and making sure, looking to the side of it, making sure that it meets the forehead at each point, so that when we merge it all together it will be 3D printable. And just checking out the way that the objects meet each other. If you cut in slightly using the standard brush or something like that, then it will, when it prints, those objects will become more defined. They'll pop much better than if you were to just have them smoothly meet the other objects. Not really sure what that is on the side of the chest. I was originally trying to do abs. It didn't look very good, so kind of made it look a bit like some sort of plate armor pattern. I'm not really sure. Getting stuck into refining this leg armor now, bumping up to the final resolution. Once I've made sure that I've got the main forms mapped out, it can be quite tricky to modify things once you're at this resolution, because you'll find that the mesh starts to become a bit lumpy, just generally difficult to manage. So that's why we tend to keep things low at first so that we can have more control. using inflate in the middle to give that more the form, a little bit more volume. So now I'm going to create a rope. If you check out the description, I'll put a link to the video I was following to work this out. I don't do it often, so I do need to remind myself how to go about this. I think I may make a tutorial video at some point on how to make chains and ropes and things of that nature. So using a curve, and then it's repeating the rope pattern along the curve, it's fitting to the curve, and then we can replace our original mesh. When you're selecting nodes in a curve, you can hit the Alt and S keys, and that will let you scale up the mesh that's sort of attached to each node. So I'm using the mesh filter to smooth out the rope once I've merged it together, and then inflate tightens up those twists on the rope, a bit like the muscles. Try and add a bit more interest to the staff. We're at the final detailing stages now. Just putting in the refined symbol that, which I tidied up on the forehead, just copying that to the staff so I don't need to repeat myself. just cutting in the other toes with draw sharp. We don't really need to define the toenail like we did with the big toe, because there's such a small detail that the gesture of them alone is should be enough. Quite often when I'm cutting in with draw sharp, I'll smooth afterwards when it's an organic shape like the legs and arms, and just makes the cut look a bit more natural. Just adding a small detail to the sandal so it marks out where the heel would be. Reusing that rope mesh and positioning it on part of the sandal so we can bend it using the snake hook. When I was remeshing the rope at first there, because it didn't have caps on either end, the remesher didn't really know what to do, and we got a bad result. So what I did was mask out the top and bottom and then mask slice and fill holes, which fills up the holes nicely that were there, and then we can remesh successfully. Copying over the work done on the sandal to the right side, and just sorting these toes out. They look a bit strange without the sandal, but the sandal was masking a lot of the foot. Trying something new for the waist area. I got rid of the flowing material at some point. Trying something a little bit more subtle. So it's as though the material's tied at the waist, and then these are just a couple of well, it's the remaining part of the ties. Got to be mindful that you don't make some parts too thin. Of course, when we 3D printing them, they can be very delicate if they're too thin, so be mindful of that. replacing the armor symbol with the one that we've been using on the staff and the forehead, making sure that fits the form of the armor, and then polishing it up slightly. Inflate on the lips works really nicely to make those look much more realistic. A neat trick for selecting many different objects at once, if there's only really a couple on the scene that you don't want to select, you can select those. So for example, I selected the base there, and if you hit Control I, then it inverts your selection to all the other objects, and that can be quite useful. I'm making a backup of the separate parts of the head just before I merge them all together and remesh. So I'm doing that so that I can tweak one side slightly to break up the symmetry, because it looks quite unnatural if the face is perfectly symmetrical. And just before you start merging all the objects together, make sure you create a copy of all of the objects separately, just in case you wanted to build from this model later on, make changes, or perhaps even make the character in a different pose. You could reuse the meshes that you've worked on. So I'm selecting everything now and making sure that I unparent them all, apply the scale on them all, and make sure they're all single users. I convert all of the objects to a mesh so that applies all of the modifiers automatically, and then hit Control J and then remesh everything together at a resolution higher than your final resolution while you were sculpting. And then you'll get, if you look at the seams, you'll get some slight deformation in the seams, but it won't be noticeable when it prints. So I'm applying a decimate at 0.1, and once that's applied, I'm going to export the file using the 3D print toolbox add-on and see how big it is. We don't want it to be too big if we're sharing it online, or for example I'll be putting it onto Gumroad, and for free files there's a 25 megabyte limit, so I want to make sure I can fit the unsupported and supported models into a zip file. So we're looking for about 10 megabytes for the model. So once I've decimated to 0.1, I'll decimate it again to I think 0.3, something like that.
Now that the model's complete, all that's left to do is to support and print our miniature. And here's the finished result. That's the end of our Sculpt walkthrough for this monk adventurer. Take a look at this Goblin Scrapper character I worked on recently. You could download him for free on my Gumroad. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon, just like these people did. Thanks again for watching, and see you in the next one.